We'll start the meeting, call the meeting to order, and welcome to the Futures Committee meeting for Monday, June 8th. And let's see. So it's a remote meeting, and we've got the call-in information. So just for those that are new to the Futures Committee, the Futures Committee is a subcommittee of the City Council. There's three of us, Julie and Emily and myself. And the idea of the Futures Committee is we think about topics not currently on our 6-month planning calendar and things that we're currently dealing with from a policy perspective, but it's an opportunity to have a topic that we can invite in guests and they can help stimulate our thinking. And today we have a great topic with the Voice of Youth, and look forward to that one, to have a conversation with our 5 students with the Voice of the Future, and really thinking about Fort Collins and the future of education and all the ideas. And I know that there have been some preparation and some prompts to help to stimulate some of the topics that they'll be presenting. But as we think about the future, and as we do it, it allows for a council to lift our head up and to look at the horizon on various topics, and we can explore those in a conversational sort of a way. And then inevitably, those kinds of conversations can help us and guide us in our current thinking as to, as you bring them back to today and how they're very relevant to our what we need to be thinking about today as we prepare for our future. So we appreciate our presenters today. We look forward to that, and that's the idea of the Futures Committee. As we get started here, let's have a motion if we're ready for the May 11th meeting minutes.
I move approval of the May 11th future meeting minutes.
Thank you,
Second.
Julie. Okay, thank you, Emily. So a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed? Okay, it passes. And with that, Jackie, turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Mayor. We've actually been preparing for this particular topic for quite some time, because I think our amazing young leaders were originally going to join us a couple months ago. Our prep call, our first one, was right as COVID was hitting, and I remember Megan and I saying, well, it might be virtual. We're still trying, to decide which meetings might be in person, and we've all been reflecting how much has changed since then, and also how the view of the future for all of us has changed. And I love, Mayor, that you said that voices of youth are the voices of the future. And we're going to hear what is on their minds and in their hearts during this time that we know has had a lot of impact on our youth. So I'm going to share the bios of each of the amazing young leaders joining us, and you can scroll on the video to be able to see each one as I introduce them. And then in amazing form, they're really kind of co-created how they're going to do this session in prompting each other in a dialogue. And we prepared them that no Futures Committee session is the same, and that it's a space where there's a lot of engagement. And so, the next hour ahead, we'll have a lot of opportunity to dialogue together. So the first youth leader I want to introduce to that I'm getting to see in my video screen is Jada Rodriguez. Hi, Jada, welcome. And Jada, hi. And Jada was the former president of Cultural Arms at Rocky Mountain High School, where she was invited to speak at several staff meetings about how to be more culturally relevant and sensitive in the classroom. She was also on the executive committee for the Northern Colorado Diversity Conference. Jada, welcome. We're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Next is Catherine Demerit, Kat. And Kat just completed her senior year at Rocky Mountain High School. Congratulations on graduation, Kat. and plans to attend Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. next year to study international politics in the School of Foreign Service. She's lived in Fort Collins her whole life and has been active in both school activities such as debate and peer counseling, as well as local politics through voter outreach work on various candidates, campaigns, and ballot issues. Welcome, Kat. We're glad to have you here. Next is Louise Holland. Louise has lived in Fort Collins her whole life and was born at PVH, just like my babies were. Awesome. Yeah, we love PVH babies. And also just graduated from Rocky Mountain High School. In high school, she participated in speech and debate, as well as AP Arts, and volunteered at our Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. This year, she got involved with the Fort Collins Youth Advisory Board, and in her words, it has been a blast, which we love to hear, that our boards and commissions are a blast. Note to the community, right? And that she felt really lucky to get to attend the National League of Cities in Washington, D.C. And really, it was that trip that inspired her to become more politically active. In the fall, she will be majoring in political science and a minor in health science at Fort Lewis College. And she's currently getting her CNA certification and trying to stay active in the Fort Collins community. Louise, welcome. Next is Suhas Narayanan. And Suhas is also a graduating senior. We have a lot of big milestones passing right now from Fort Collins High School, and also born and raised in Fort Collins and had the pleasure of serving on the Youth Advisory Board for the past 2 years. Suhas volunteers at chess tournaments in Fort Collins and is passionate about innovation and science. Suhas, welcome. And finally, Dylan Lindsay is a politically active student at Rocky Mountain High School and a member of the City of Fort Collins Youth Advisory Board as well. Recently, he had the experience of being an essential employee, running a small business, and traveling to DC with City Council. Being a junior in the fall, Dylan is determined to continue his political advocacy within the city to better the community he cares about so much. So before I turn it over to these incredible young people, what I'll say, you know, being a public servant during this time has come with great emotion, as I know the committee members, and that we're just so connected to the community's response and recovery. And it's been a real bright spot for me during this time to connect to these amazing young people, because in all of that, like, I hear the recovery in their voices and in what they're dreaming of the future to be, what they're working towards the future to be, and just how bright and engaged and connected with each other they are. It just has given me just, you know, so much peace and hope during this time. And so I'm really excited to learn more from them, and I will pass it over. I'm not sure who's starting, but I'll pass it over to you all, and you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. So I'm just going to start. What we are doing is I'm going to introduce the question that kind of guided us to our points of views and what we're going to talk about. So our first question is, what are major issues and concerns you think the leaders should be thinking about in the future? So I'll just kind of start this off. My first major issue I would have to say is climate change. I don't know a single young person who doesn't think climate change is a big issue. So I think that's a huge deal. And for Fort Collins in the future, I think that we need to keep innovating and keep being a leader in climate change. I mean, we are in the Smithsonian for this, so I think that we need to continue to push forward. My second point is that our landfill is almost full. So I think that in the future we need to continue to devising ways to become more waste-free every single day. This isn't just an issue for the city, but everyone in the city. So more education and more outreach, and continuing to make that effort to be more waste-free. And then the last point that I have for the future is making a greater push to make sure that everyone, regardless of income, race, or social status, has access to resources. So like public parks and opportunities to go outside into natural areas, as well as public transportation. I think that's really huge. And then also housing. I think that that's a really big issue. Right now and going into the future, it's probably always going to be an issue, but we need to make sure that everyone has adequate access to housing. And yeah, so.
Thank you, Lise.
Yeah, and for me, I just decided to focus just mainly on climate change. Like Louise said, we're in the Smithsonian for that. Last year, when I went to the National League of Cities and the Museum of American History, we are next to like Los Angeles, the Bronx, and all these places that have had their impact on history. And then there's just like little old Fort Collins there, just sort of leading the charge on climate change and green technology. And I think that's really a big issue for me, is just using innovation and CSU and just other resources to really set an example for other cities to follow us and follow our developments, policies, innovations to really help reduce our emissions in general. And the climate action plan is a great way to do our part in reducing those emissions.
Thank you, Suhas.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said so far about climate change. I think as far as that goes, also maintaining our open spaces and our green spaces is super crucial. I know obviously there's a lot of development because Fort Collins is growing at a huge rate, but I think maintaining a lot of those spaces to keep nature a huge part of Fort Collins, because I think that's one of the best parts of Fort Collins, is that it does prioritize that. And then also obviously the transition to renewable power, you know, solar and wind power are very available and definitely feasible options given where we live. And so continuing that transition, Fort Collins is already leading as far as climate change, but just continuing that and maintaining the things that we already have. And then I think probably the other top concern among our generation, right up there with climate change, when I talk to people my age, is definitely equity and social justice. And so obviously Fort Collins is an overall largely white community, but we certainly do have ethnic minority populations, and especially a significant and growing Hispanic population. And so with all of the recent concerns, it sounds like Fort Collins police have been very open to the requests of protesters and towards trying to work with protesters and things like that. So obviously the work needs to continue to be done there to make sure that our local criminal justice structures are being equitable across all groups of people and all populations in Fort Collins. And then in addition to that, an issue that kind of goes hand in hand with that, and then I know a lot of people in my generation are also concerned about, is the affordability issue and the fact that Fort Collins, with all this growth, is becoming expensive. I know a lot of my friends I've talked to say that they would love to raise their families here, they'd love to keep living here, but they don't know if they'll be able to afford it. So I think that making sure to incentivize affordable housing developments and to prioritize that kind of action so that it can be a community that people can continue to live in from all socioeconomic backgrounds and not just from the upper middle class.
Thank you. Thank you, Kat.
Kind of continuing on what a lot of people have already said, I believe that climate change is one of the biggest issues that people of our generation and our age range are focusing on. It's when we talk about climate future, it's our future that we're focusing on. And so to be able to attend different environmental events throughout the city, it's been interesting to see that it is on the forefront of our city, but there's only so much that the city can do. And I feel like it's important to encourage every individual person to play their own part, as well as the larger corporations within Fort Collins. One person, while they make a change, they only make so much, but 175,000 people within the city makes a huge change. And between all of the businesses within the city, we can create an even greater change. And so I think really utilizing the city to encourage and incentivize that people make greener choices is important. And in the ability to attend one of the super issue meetings, I was able to learn just how easy it would be for some of our natural areas to be developed. And so I think that really pushing to create more policy that protects those not only helps the climate and environment, but really makes Fort Collins who we are and gives a lot of culture to our city.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah, so going off of everything everybody else has said, I agree. Climate change is one of my top concerns. I think as a society, we focus, at least in Fort Collins, we do focus a lot on recycling, but I think that we can do more in terms of like encouraging reuse of things, because that's more beneficial than recycling. And then another concern I have is just how we view as a society, how we view and interact with other cultures. Because yes, like Kat said, we are majority white in Fort Collins. However, there's a lot of minorities. And I know that we're scared and we want to normalize being non-white in our society. And I think that is extremely important. Also, I know that since it's a college town, a lot of people, well, students as well as just other people in our community, since it is so expensive, are dealing a lot with hunger. And I think that's something that we need to focus more on in the future, is making sure everybody has a meal.
Thanks, Jada. Appreciate it.
All right, so we're going to kind of move on to our next question. So our next question is, how has COVID changed your thoughts about the future? And I know people went kind of broad on this one. So for me personally, when COVID hit, I really wanted to become an EMT. And I've actually started by enrolling in CNA training because I really want to help the community. So that kind of like shifted my view of like, how can I help? And then to kind of like rein it back, it's very isolating right now in the time of COVID. And so that has got me thinking a lot about like mental health resources into the future, especially for people in domestic violence situations and students who are now isolated from going to school. It's been really, really hard on a lot of people's mental health, and a lot of those resources are out of our reach. And so I think that into the future, mental health resources need to be built up. They need to be accessible to anyone who needs them, because that's really, really important right now. And it's really crucial for our community. And then my one last thought on COVID. Personally, it's been really hard seeing people not social distancing, not wearing masks. Obviously, I support people going to the protests and I want people to continue to voice those concerns, but seeing people hang out with other people has been really hard for me. And I think a lot of that has been like the relaxing of restrictions in Fort Collins and people not understanding really what that means, and understanding that a lot of those safety measures still need to be taken and that COVID is going to continue for a while. So that's been really hard. And I think that there needs to be more of like a setting of expectations for people in Fort Collins of what does relaxing restrictions mean? What does that mean for everyone going outside and hanging out? And I think it's a huge health concern going into the future. And so that's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Thanks, Luis.
Yeah, so I completely agree with Luis there about the lack of social distancing. Like, just drive by Old Town and you'll see all of these people without masks. And it's nice to see them, like, support local businesses and see friends again. But it's also important to understand what are safe ways of engaging with each other. When should you wear a mask, even if you're hanging out with other people and stuff like that. And going back more to the question now, like, how has it changed my thoughts about the future? For me personally, my future plans haven't really changed, but I feel like for a lot of people, and especially education, having to do these online classes will really show people like, hey, I actually kind of like the online option better. So instead of enrolling at maybe like CSU next year, I'm going to try to take like at least a semester of online courses at University of Phoenix online and try to test that out. So then I feel like with this, it sort of deconstructs what we perceive as the traditional college experience, which I think is really good as people sort of find their own paths that way. And also, I want to talk about in a different sort of train of thought is just like funds, like emergency funds. Fort Collins set up loans for small businesses in Larimer County. I think they partnered with Will County on that. And that was really good to see how the city is trying to intervene here and help local businesses stay afloat. And then if there's any way we could somehow in the future create a fund for just emergency situations. So this could be like natural disasters, stuff like that, or a pandemic, as we're seeing here now. That way we can help people. Like in education, we've seen our high schools have to cut positions because just economic dominoes falling. They have a significant lack of revenue. So having a fund like that could really help increase resiliency.
Thank you, Suez.
Yeah, as far as me personally, the biggest aspect of COVID that I've witnessed in my life is its effects on education. Obviously, because I was in school this year and my sister was as well, but then both my parents are teachers too in the district. So I've kind of watched it play out in the education field a lot. The biggest impact that I've seen looking towards the future as far as that aspect is the educational disparity that's developed because of COVID-19. So for example, for my mom's kindergarten class especially, her students that are low income and especially her Hispanic students have had little to no meaningful participation in a lot of the online resources and classes she's been trying to teach. And so despite all the efforts, the district did make a lot of efforts to, make sure that all kids had access to laptops and were able to pick those up, and that all kids had access to internet. But it's still just really difficult, I think, for kids, especially younger kids in those like lower income or minority families who are essential workers or even essential worker families, or who are trying to deal with a lot of other financial issues that are coming with this. It's harder for those students to still meaningfully engage with this different online system. And so obviously a lot of the school funding decisions does come from the state and the federal level, but still I think it's important to mention that going forwards in education, funding and support and resources from all levels of government, I think, are going to be even more crucial than they have been in the past, because all of those kids that have experienced this growing gap in education, when they're coming back in future years, it's going to take even more work, even more resources, even more time and effort to catch them up to where they need to be so that they still have access to that education that they deserve. So I think having some form of in-person learning in the fall, even if it's irregular or supplemented by online, will hopefully be possible, which I think will be really important to addressing that gap. And then just continuing to support the resources that teachers need, essentially making sure that that educational gap can be closed in the coming years, I think will be a really big priority, especially for younger students, but for all students in Fort Collins. And then I also very much agree on the point of mental health resources. I know the county commissioned the development of a new mental health facility recently, which is really awesome, and just continuing in that direction of providing mental health resources, making that accessible, because this time has been very isolating for people. And so, yeah, education and mental health, I think it's changed my perspectives on those two things a lot.
Thank you, Kat.
So as I mentioned in my short little bio, I served as an essential employee through the majority of the shutdown, and I actually worked for a company that was developing a way to decontaminate N95 and surgical masks so that places like PPH, Salud, Women's Clinic, places across northern Colorado, the nation, and now the world would have ways to disinfect and keep stuff safe for their employees. But as I was looking at that, my company I was fortunate enough that they cared a lot, and they were able to provide me with masks and were able to provide me with the stuff that I needed to keep myself safe, and gave me hazard pay. However, looking out at other people who were considered essential employees and being able to talk to people like that was incredibly frightening, because I had friends who were working in grocery stores, and these people who were working almost entry-level jobs and were making minimum wage for it. It took a month and a half for King Soopers to offer their employees hazard pay, and Safeway never did. And so to see these people working minimum wage, or working for minimum wage, and then putting themselves at such a great risk to keep our society running, just shocked me. And so we were able even to donate a large number of masks to places like Safeway and King Soopers, grocery stores, and some of the hospitals. And so to have companies not looking out for their employees shocked me. And at some points I felt like the city could have played a bigger role in encouraging companies to protect their employees more. And so as we move forward with that, encouraging back pay or trying to get companies to offer more services to their employees who are risking their lives in these jobs that aren't often thought highly of in society, and really recognizing them. But also the increase in mental health resources. I have a mom who's a social worker, and I also work as a mental health resource to a lot of friends and some other people within the community. And just to hear there's so much comparative guilt where, oh, this got canceled for me, but it'll never be as bad as their graduation getting canceled, or oh, my graduation got canceled, but will never be as bad as their wedding getting canceled. And so many people aren't letting themselves feel guilty. And I think that as we're coming through the pandemic and through the pandemic part of this, even though it's far from over, we're hitting that point where mental health is now catching up with it, and these people are needing these services, and there needs to be ways for us to increase the services that we can offer, whether that's in a partnership with CSU's social work department or increasing mental health resources in other ways. It's going to catch up to us even as we move past the pandemic and look towards the future. And I, again, support the city's mask policies and the continuation of them, but tying into seeing people in Old Town, you know, we're smoke-free in Old Town. Why can we not encourage masks in those areas? It is city property. And so I know that we're still requiring them inside of all businesses and organizations, but I feel like these public areas that we know are large gathering places, we've been able to enforce restrictions there previously. And so I feel like having the mask policy carry into those areas would add to the effectiveness of it.
Thank you. Dylan?
I definitely agree with what Dylan said. I actually work in a small business downtown, and I know that I obviously have to wear a mask inside my business, but I have so many customers that don't, and I honestly feel kind of disrespected that I make the effort to protect them, but they're not making the same effort towards me. So I feel like we could do a better job just trying to enforce things like that, because I know that I'm already a target right now, and then asking somebody to put on a mask, it's kind of scary. And then going back to COVID, I guess, more with the essential businesses, one of my parents does work at a grocery store, and I know that it has been really scary. And at first they were not given masks or anything. And so I just think that if the city could help more in encouraging things like that, that would be a great idea. And moving to how it's changed my future, I guess, I think it's really opened my eyes to more of the racial and ethnic disparities, just because a lot of people of color are those essential workers, and they are not being protected, and their chances of getting COVID are so much higher. I think that's really scary. I don't know how to fix that, but I think it's something that we should be paying attention to. And then I'm also going to see you in the fall and staying for 2 months, and then coming back for Thanksgiving and staying. And I think the mental health part of that is going to be an interesting journey, just because we get to go and experience things, but then we're kind of put on lockdown again. So just making sure that everybody is taken care of, and yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Moving into the next section, we posed the question, how does racial injustice and Black Lives Matter impact us and the Fort Collins community? And I have really supported the Fort Collins's response and the chief's message that they're taking the step by listening, because I think personally I'm still learning, and I think that it's important that we fully understand the issue before we try and create solutions. I think that solutions are urgent and that something needs to change, but I think that it's smart to find an educated solution and not just slap a Band-Aid on something that's going to take a lot more than that. However, I I do think that it's going to be extremely important, especially as we're looking towards the future, to really push to make sure that that action is taken, because we can't say that we're in a waiting period and be waiting right now and then not ever act. And so we need to take this opportunity and learn from it, but it's going to be extremely important that we act as we say we will, and that change actually happens within the city, as well as recognizing the diversity that we do have and encouraging more, recognizing that we are not a very diverse town, but really making those people who are diverse feel welcomed here. It's one thing when you have someone who's not diverse raised here, they seek out people who fit their background and their demographic, because they feel that they'll be more welcomed. And so if we can make people feel that they're being recognized here, we can encourage more people to stay, as well as encouraging more diversity within the city. And I think that events like You Celebrate Diversity, as I'm sure Jada will talk about, are extremely important and helpful with that. And so seeing the city work on events similar to that, I think could really help shape our future, and increase the diversity within our city.
Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, so just to kind of follow that up, really what I see, I mean, as a white person, I think my job right now is just to continue to educate myself and continue to be learning about the experiences of people of color, and also, you know, make sure that people of color are being heard in my community. But really what I think about into the future is the continuing education of everyone in the Fort Collins community on like racial injustice. And I especially think this should be talking about like racial injustice in Fort Collins and our history of racial injustice and segregation within the Fort Collins borders. And I think like it's very hard to kind of seek out this information, and in order for us to learn and grow and go forward, we need to learn as a community kind of like what our past was like and that racial injustice in our past. And so I think that the ignorance is the driver of hate. So we need to continue to educate ourselves and make sure that we are listening to minorities in our community and far into the future, not just when people are protesting, but always.
Thank you, Luis.
I'm going to take a more policy aspect. Campaign Zero is a great resource as it focuses on how to reduce police violence and how to reduce police brutality. And I'd just really like to commend the state of Fort Collins as well as the state of Colorado, because they have this little map where you can see where policy has been passed to fit their sectors. And Colorado is very good in that, hits nearly every sector. But even with that, we still have areas to improve. There's also been lots of talk recently about redirecting funds from police to like other community-based solutions. Minneapolis is trying to disband the police department entirely, but just more research into different alternatives of police that could be expanding mental health resources, as we've touched upon, as well as just finding different ways to approach policing, changing warrior training. But all in all, it was really nice to see how much the state of Colorado did, and the state of Fort Collins having citizen review boards and stuff like that, but we still have a long way to go.
Thank you, Suhas.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of people in my generation and just in general, white people in Fort Collins, it's easy for us to look around and say, oh, Fort Collins is doing great, which we are, and we have passed policies and we have done work. But obviously, like, we can't necessarily speak to those experiences. And so I think it's not necessarily on us to be the advocates for this specific issue, if that makes sense, because I mean, obviously I can't advocate to the experiences of a person of color in Fort Collins. And so I think in that aspect, probably the most important thing, I know I'm pretty sure there are already committees that exist for this, but continuing to enhance and spend more time talking with committees that are specifically committees of people of color, focused on issues that people of color face in Fort Collins, and, you know, council meetings that are directly related to people of color being the voices that are heard in those situations. Because I think the biggest thing we can do right now, I agree with Louise, is as, you know, white people, we have to listen, because people of color's experiences are not experiences that we can speak to or really understand. And so if we listen to those voices in our community and we amplify those, and if our local governments are actively seeking out those voices to listen to, I think that's going to be the way that we come about the most impactful change and the change that's actually needed by the people in our community. So yeah, continuing to facilitate that conversation with the police department is obviously great, and continuing to make reforms in that direction, but just making sure to amplify the voices of people of color and listen to those as far as the directions we should take on these.
Thank you, Kat.
I agree with everything that everybody has said so far. I think that as far as police go, our department is actually doing a pretty good job of handling everything. And just in the future, good background checks and things like that. I think we should also focus on mental health of our police officers as well, just to make sure, you know, if there is any biases that they might have, they can get help for that. And then, so I've lived in Fort Collins my entire life, and I, of course, have experienced racism and in general. And then this year I was a part of the Northern Colorado Diversity Conference. And I think that experience, if the county or Fort Collins in general could be, have more events like that, it would be amazing, just because it gives people of color a great place to meet other people of color. And then it gives this, if everybody is invited, it gives people an opportunity to learn. And I think that's the most important aspect of all of this, is that people are learning and listening to people of color. And then it will build compassion and hopefully lessen the degree to which our society is racist. I think also, as far as, I think if Fort Collins is able to, just within PSD, focusing a lot more on diverse resources and teachers, just so that we can be anti-racist as a society. I think it's really important that we're teaching this in our schools, and that our white people are getting to see more from people of color.
Hey, Jada.
All right, so we've got one or two kind of last final points. So our next question is, what are our personal plans for the future? And I know we kind of covered this already, but so for me personally, I'm getting my CNA certification right now. So hopefully I'll be certified by the end of July and get to start working after that. And then in the fall, I'm going to be attending Fort Lewis, hopefully on campus. We haven't gotten any updates from the school yet. But I'm going to be studying political science with a minor in health science. So I want to do something in public health.
And what is CNA?
CNA is Certified Nursing Assistant. So it's
Okay.
a lot of doing
CNA. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, college is the next step for me. Also, hopefully on campus in the fall, we'll see what happens with that. My long-term plans haven't been disrupted. I'm still probably going to try to go into business or healthcare, and yeah.
And Suas, where are you going to college?
Oh,
Shoot.
I'm going to the University of Pennsylvania, Warren.
Okay, so you Penn. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll be at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., studying international politics. I'll hopefully be in D.C. and working on campaigns this fall and everything like that. And then continuing on to be a part of international politics and maybe domestic politics too. We'll see where I end up in that realm, but somewhere in the realm of politics and government.
Thanks, Kat.
I will be still in Fort Collins come this fall. I'm actually working on 2 campaigns, which will end in November. And then we'll hopefully continue my time on the Youth Advisory Board, and I'm seeking more internship opportunities as this summers were disrupted. And so my short-term plans and some of the internships that I planned on pursuing were disrupted, but my long-term plans still stand to pursue political science and really keep trying to make the world and my community a better place.
Thanks, Dylan.
For me, in the fall, I'm going to go to CU Boulder, and I'm studying journalism, and I'm getting my minor in multicultural leadership. I'm really excited, even though I only get to stay for 2 months. But yeah, I'm excited.
Very good, Jada. Thank you.
So we just had some final thoughts. I just wanted to say thank you to the committee for listening to our voices and our concerns and taking the time. It really means a lot to like have youth voices heard in the community.
Thank you, Luis.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I'm leaving for college. I don't know if I'll come back to Fort Collins because of the housing prices, but it's just been awesome to be born and raised in such a wonderful and progressive community. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Suas.
I absolutely agree with everything. Above all, I do absolutely love this city. I'm so happy to have grown up here. I'm going to miss it a whole lot when I have to go away for college, and hopefully we'll end up here at some point along in my life. But I do think that thanks to a lot of the work you guys do and our local government in general, and Fort Collins as a city is just an incredible place to live. And so thank you all for helping make it so amazing and building the kind of community that we're really lucky to be a part of.
Thank you, Kat.
Just continuing on that, I'm so incredibly grateful for the ability to grow up in such an amazing place and for the amazing leaders that we have creating the amazing space that I've been so fortunate to grow up in. And I'm very grateful for opportunities like this that allow for all voices to be heard and allow for people who are passionate about making their city better, be better even if they aren't in an elected position. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to have my opinions and voice heard. And I love Fort Collins, so thank you guys for everything.
Thanks, Jada.
Yep.
So is that that's the program?
Yep.
All right. Well,
You guys
thank you
enjoy.
so much. And thanks for sharing your thoughts with regards to starting off with your future of Fort Collins and about the COVID impacts and how that's been impacting you, and then the racial injustice and your thoughts there as we as we're having conversations about that, and then you're excited. We're excited about your future plans. A great future in front of you, and thank you so much for being grateful and to a wonderful community that you're brought up in. So, open it up for any questions or comments that council members might have, or further discussion as you presented it.
I can go first.
Please, and then
Sure.
also I see Kristen Stevens joined us as well. So Kristen, you can join in as well.
Yeah,
so
and I
ahead,
apologize for being late.
No, that's all right.
Great. Thank you everyone for coming and sharing your ideas. I was also born at PVH, so welcome to the club. Thank you for calling it PVH and not UC Health, because we all know it's PVH.
Yeah.
And I graduated from Fort Collins High School, and I left and then I came back. So I feel like I identify with a lot of you, but you know, I think just listening to you all, I took the most notes I've ever taken during Futures Committee during this. So thank you. You know, I think that it's almost reassuring to and sad at the same time that a lot of the issues you all are worried about are the issues that we're talking about at council. And so I feel like you guys provided a lot of light and a lot of direction for us, which is great. I think that, you know, thinking about climate change, and a lot of you touched on this balance between climate change and growth and affordability and open space, which is something that, you know, we've been talking a lot about at council, and just that issue and challenge and how do we move forward with that. And so I believe, you know, we only had like 30 minutes together, but I know that if we spent some time talking about this, that you all would bring some really great perspective. And so I hope that we can include you more in that conversation. I did have one question. That a lot of you talked about climate change and the city, knowing that the city is doing work in this space, but I guess my question is, what would you all see that you would say, oh my gosh, the city is doing like an amazing job, or like you saw something and you're like, I'm so proud, and we're leaders in this space. And so, and if you don't have an answer now, that's okay. But I'm just curious if there's anything that pops up and you're like, that would be so amazing if I saw my city do that.
Well, for me, it was the climate action plan. Like when I first heard about, it, I'm like carbon neutral by 2050. Is that even possible? Like, just seeing our progress there, and like once we hit 2050, if we're carbon neutral, that is a huge accomplishment, and that would make me really proud of my city there.
For me, it's our climate future, continuing Arbor Day and continuing people to xeriscape and push the community as a whole towards more climate awareness. But then also seeing, I've been a longtime supporter of a plastic bag tax within the city, and creating more incentives for businesses to go green. And I think 222 LaPorte is a great example of how that can be done efficiently. And so I think that the city pushing more people to be green and more companies to be green is going to be influential.
I think the area of transportation is also one where I see both the things that make me really proud of Fort Collins and the big areas of growth. I think obviously we're an amazing biking town, so I see people biking a lot of places, which is super great. And then the institution of the Max recently, I think has definitely helped with that too. So I think it's really great that we have a lot of those kinds of options, especially the biking is something that makes me really proud right now. And then I think another area for growth as far as that goes is definitely expanding that public transportation, because I know right now the Max is fairly limited as far as where it goes. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest things I see in Fort Collins that could improve, is that because it is such a spread out area, most people drive to commute basically anywhere. So I think expanding the Max lines and expanding that public transportation that's beyond just biking would be super great.
And then as far as the COVID, when we were talking about that, how it's now and kind of in the future, Jackie kind of brought up an idea for a future committee. Futures committee is talking about building community, and especially I think for how do we build, and also with the racial injustices, how do we build community for people of color, and how can the city play a role in that? And so how do we build community, especially, you know, and resiliency in a time like COVID, and then continuing along those lines as well, I think might be a great topic. So thinking about that, and then, you know, talking about educational gaps and moving forward and those issues, and how do we develop partnerships with the Hooters, the school board. And so thank you for all of your comments in that space. And I think that also your comments about people not understanding rules and being a little afraid of going out into public spaces. And I think that I'm hearing a lot of similar community that what are the rules, and it is a confusing space. And so I think, you know, how do we create more education materials and have a community conversation about that is worth pursuing. And then finally, just, you know, talking about racial injustice and Black Lives Matters, and a lot of earlier comments about social justice. Thank you all so much for being involved in this space. And social justice is a profession and personal pursuit of mine. And so it's really great to hear you all being active in that space. And I will say that Kristen and I are having a listening session on Wednesday with the Chief of Police to start hearing about some of these community ideas. So we welcome you all to join us. And Megan or Jackie, can you send out the information to the group in case they want to join and pass it along to others? So I think that part of it is really learning about what people want to see, reviewing our policies, and then taking those actionable steps. So thank you also for being involved. And if you want to tune in, if not, there will be many other opportunities. And I think that, you know, equity and inclusion is a priority of City Council for these 2 years, and really bringing in your voices and how do we actually carry that out. I think having those hard conversations about racial injustice, and the last Futures Committee, we started talking about these more historical barriers and how they have played into our today and then the future. So I don't have any questions. I just want to say a big thank you, and I hope that we can facilitate more ways for you all to be engaged and provide feedback. So thanks again.
Thanks, Emily. Other council members?
Yeah, I'll go.
All right, Julie.
Yeah, Thanks. So thank you all so much for coming and talking to us today. I echo everything Emily has said so far, and I have two questions, but before I get into those, I do want to say I'm not happy, but I'm happy to see that climate change is still something people are talking about, since it does tend to affect inequitably, if that's the right word, as well as, a lot of what's happening with the climate could be how these type of viruses are becoming more prevalent. So it's kind of scary times. So thanks again. I've got two questions. One's easier than the other. So I'll start with the easy one to kind of prep you guys. So I was not born at PVH. I'm from Colorado Springs, but I came up here to go to CSU and was one of those that ended up staying. And but my son was born at PVH, and he's going to be entering second grade next year at Shepherdson Elementary School. And in one way or another, I don't know how that's going to look like, but I'm curious, for you guys growing up here, what experiences did you have growing up that I need to make sure he has to feel so connected to the city and to really encourage, because you guys are obviously very active, which I think is probably more of a minority of folks, well, in general, but, also in your age group. So I'd just love to hear what experiences you guys had that I should make sure are part of his upbringing.
One thing that I think is like really small, but definitely like looms really large in my childhood is biking the Pooter Trail or Spring Creek Trail. And I remember every time we would bike down Spring Creek Trail, we would always go get ice cream from like Dairy Queen. And honestly, I think just like the act of like going to bike to get ice cream, like it instilled into me like, all of the great opportunities to go outside and all of like our natural areas and spaces. So I think that's really like such a great part of Fort Collins, and honestly, growing up here, like you can't get that anywhere else. So yeah.
For me, it was the parks, just like for get-togethers, like go inside when we can just go to a park, like play on the large mammoth and stuff. And just as a kid growing up, like I'll always remember just having fun at the parks and then also going biking on the trails. And yeah.
I really encourage him to speak his mind or them, sorry, and don't shy away from the difficult conversations. It's important to understand how amazing our city is, but also areas that our city can improve, and allowing them to develop their own opinions and share those with you is really beneficial, at least to me.
For me, I went to a lot of cultural events that they had downtown, like the Cinco de Mayo celebration. That's my favorite one personally that they have. But just spending a lot of time downtown and people watching, I think is really important and fun.
Yeah, it was definitely the outdoors for me. That's the thing I love most about Fort Collins is, Horsetooth Rock is right there. I actually live across the street from Horsetooth Rock. So it's like there's all these hikes and walks and opportunities. And then even the parks, just like sometimes I'll just go eat lunch at Rollin' More just because it's nice to just be outside and surrounded by all of that. So that's been my favorite experience growing up here.
That's great.
Awesome. Those are amazing. Thank you guys so much. All right, so now for the hard question. On council, a lot of the decisions we have to make deal with these conflicting priorities. And I think Emily touched on it a little bit, but I would be curious how you guys how you anticipate approaching, because these sort of things will happen in your life, whether you're making decisions on a council or not. But I was wondering if you have any ideas of how to approach conflicting priorities that maybe us old farts haven't, come into yet. I know it's a hard one. Don't feel like everyone has to speak to that one because that's pretty tough.
So I'm a big believer in democracy and really hearing everyone's opinion. And so beyond the fact that you are elected to public office by the citizens of Fort Collins, there's so many different polling opportunities out there. And so almost creating a way that people within the city could sign up to be polled, and just maybe the agenda for council items, especially when it's something that is extremely controversial, and just sending out one more reach for public feedback that's extremely easy using technology or other forms of communication the city has, and really just pulling in as much community information as you can, as much relevant information as you can to help make those decisions justified. And I think that'll help support those decisions to the community.
Also for me, one of the things that I realized, like especially with college, like trying to choose a major, realizing when priorities change. Like when we have this one initial priority that we've always stuck with, but then realizing, and then this can be helped and justified by survey data, just like, oh hey, maybe I didn't value this avenue as much as I did before, and just realizing that to help redirect priorities, understand what is it I'm trying to do, what am I trying to accomplish, what's the identity of me right now, and what I want to see in the future. Just sort of stuff like that, I guess.
Very good.
This question kind of makes me think of, I know not everyone's going to get this reference, but there's this Parks and Rec episode where Leslie is going out trying to get support for her park and getting this pit filled in, and they're canvassing, and the only people that can come to her public meeting are people who are strongly against this park, because everyone who supports it is like busy and they don't have adequate access to getting there. So, sorry, it's a little windy. So I think it's really important in the future, kind of thinking about how can we bring in a wide range of people into our city council meetings, and making sure that everyone has equal access, so it's not just one point of view being representative. And thinking about like, what are the challenges for low-income people to come to city council meetings? What are the challenges for people who are working to come to city council meetings? Because a lot of people are really passionate, but sometimes it's hard for them to even make them. So I think when prioritizing, it's hearing a lot of issues and then understanding like how can we get a lot of voices in on these issues to understand what the community really thinks is important.
Very good.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think as far as that question of prioritizing and how to prioritize, for me, that kind of made me think of debate, because in the type of debate that I do, you start out your whole debate case with a core value. And basically that kind of lays out, like a lot of times it'll be something like justice, or it'll be social welfare or societal welfare, or it's just kind of like a big value that kind of defines what your goal is. And so I think that kind of makes me think about, what the core value of Fort Collins is, if that makes sense. And so obviously that's a difficult question to answer, and there's probably a lot of values. Obviously we value justice, and we value community, and we value health, and all of those things. But I think that was just what that made me think of, was trying to determine, obviously I think about my individual core values a lot, and then thinking about Fort Collins as a whole, what kind of values does Fort Collins seem to prioritize more as a community, if that makes sense.
Very good. Well, thank
great,
you for that
thank you.
answer. Yeah. Go ahead, Julie.
Nope, that was it for me.
Okay. Yeah, that was great. And, Kristen, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's right.
If you
No,
want
go
to
ahead.
talk first. I'm going to be quick because I don't have any questions. I, like Emily, I have 3.5 pages of notes right now. I just want to say, I'm so happy that you're all graduating and going off. But actually, I'm selfishly, I wish we still had your voices in our community come the fall, because you had so many good answers. You're so knowledgeable about what's going on in our community. I am just so impressed by what you had to say, and we don't often get to hear your voices. And So one thing I'd like you all to do, it's more like a homework assignment than it is a question now, is to encourage friends that you have that are, first of all, we're glad we still have Dylan. So Dylan, I'm glad we have you for a couple more years. But I would encourage you to, if you have friends or siblings or people in the community that would like to join the board, I think that would be really important to make sure that we keep having great voices on the Youth Advisory Board. And yeah, just really thank you for your insight and for being so engaged and for honestly knowing so much. I shouldn't have done this, but I did text Emily during this meeting and say, I'm ready to turn over the reins to all of you, because sometimes we refer to you as future leaders. And I actually think you have such great ideas that you could lead right now and be just fine. And I would be happy to step out of the way and let you do that. So I would say just make sure you stay involved in whatever community you end up in. I hope you end up here, and it's my goal to make it affordable so you can end up here. But just you make sure you stay involved, because it's, as you know, and maybe some of your peers do know or don't know, that there's a lot that happens at local government. And I think people are realizing that with the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the protests that are going on, is that you can make real lasting change in your own community that can really help people. I mean, when we're talking about gaps in, whether it's gaps in education and students that can barely attend, their classes like Kat spoke to, or, Jada speaking to, I mean, just some of the opportunities that we should encourage around, having events for, to get people of color together. I really, there again, I'm just gonna, your voices are important, so make sure you lift those wherever you are. And thank you for, for enlightening us on some of these issues. There again, sometimes we hear from the same people all the time, and that's not good. And it's a good reminder for us to listen as much as we talk, and that's not easy for politicians. So, but thank you again for just for being here. Please stay in touch, and if you have ideas, please continue to share those. And there again, help us build a youth board for next year that will keep these ideas flowing, because we definitely need to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the comments and from the three council members, and I would only add, and I'll just put the exclamation mark for what they have said. I think the future is bright, and I think it's a good thing when our people that grow up here go out into the world, because I know that you'll make it a better place, and because you've grown up in a special place, and you've had the opportunities that you've had here, you can share that wherever you go. So that's an important part, that you'll always, your hometown will always be Fort Collins. And related to that, I was born in Poudre Valley Hospital, as well as my two kids. So there's a kindred aspect to that, and really appreciated getting to know Dylan and Suhas and Luis in being part of our trips to Washington D.C. and Jada and Kat. You guys are awesome, and appreciate you sharing with us here today. And I would just add the one thing that Julie asked, what is those one things that you remember that you should share? And I think for me, it was growing up and going to City Park Pool, and being a part of Parks and Recreation, and some of those programs. And there's so many things that the city does that and does so well, and that's a neat part of our community. And I would just wrap it up by saying thank you, and let's stay connected, let's stay curious, let's stay listening, and let's all make this a better place. And clearly we have a lot to learn from you guys, and thanks for joining us today in our Futures Committee and sharing with us. So thank you.
No, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
So Jackie, I heard the wind chimes at Luis's house, and now it's blowing at my house. I'm outside too, And so, what else is on our agenda, Jackie? And do you want to wrap up a little bit? I think that you.
Sure, I'll wrap up a little bit. What I want to say is I am just so excited that my kiddos who are 4 and 1 get to grow up here. Listening to all of you, I just, that's just something I feel so inspired about. And what I want to say is that each of you are just natural futurists. I mean, you, like you are just exactly what, this committee is all about, is looking out, into what's ahead. And to hear the issues that you brought up in terms of our climate future and equity and justice and affordability and mental health and educational disparity and housing and hunger and growth and open space, and how many of those are on this council's priority agenda, I think is really remarkable too, and just wanted to note and that alignment. And of course, hearing a lot of those, as I promised, I just got to talk about the prompts, but as Chief Sustainability Officer, just hearing what's on the minds and in the hearts of youth, and that this community has been really forward in terms of having a service area that a core service is sustainability services, and so much of that touches what you all brought up is just really heartening to me too. I think some other things I'll just capture is you all spoke to just, I think, some really interesting thoughts in terms of the role of government, and what youth is seeing in that role. And you all are so civically engaged that your thoughts come from just this really brilliant place. But in terms of, the role of government right now and supporting this understanding of, how, supporting each other's public health, but also the role of government, Suhas, you talking about like seeing my city set these goals and just hearing how that matters when you think about the future, and then the role of government in terms of educating, and the role of providing that equitable access to informed decision making. Who's there to inform the decisions and the perspectives, and our role too, and as we think about being prepared for future events and emergency funding. What I thought too, I loved that when we asked you how COVID impacted your thinking, that the two things that came to mind for so many of you is how can I help? And then how your thinking was deepened or changed about certain issues. And I want to say in particular that a week ago, this amazing group of young people emailed me and said, I know this wasn't planned, but we need to talk about Black Lives Matter. And I just think, again, you're natural futurists, but you're natural adaptive leaders. And you're speaking to the urgency of the present while your view on the future. And so, what I would just say too is echo, we wish you all the best and we hope you come home. And we're just, all of your futures ahead of you, your future, your individual futures are bright, and just thank you so much for sharing your voices with us today.
Very good.
Mayor.
Yeah.
Mayor, can I say one thing?
Please, Darren.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. And Darren Atterbury, City Manager. And it's good to hear your guys' voices, some of you that we've traveled with and I've met with before. And, as I was looking at my schedule this week, this past weekend, I was thinking, probably this is the meeting that I was most looking forward to. And you didn't let anyone down. You just, and I just want to say that I'm really excited about it as well. All the work that you're doing and the future that you all have. The reason why I'm muted, because I wanted to let you guys know too, sorry, it's windy out here, but you know what? I want you to have confidence in your hometown, because the leaders that you're speaking to right now in Wade and Emily and Julie and Kristen, the cool thing is their adopted priorities align so brilliantly with what you've said today. So many items that you've talked to them about, they're their antennas are up high, and their priorities have been set consistent with what you're saying. So for those of you who are leaving, Dylan, I know you're going to be with us for a little bit. I'm super excited about that. For those of you who are leaving town, you know what? Your city, your hometown is in really good hands with these leaders. I just wanted to say that because there's great alignment. And I know Kristen's ready to turn it over. And I know that Emily would love to have some of you sub for her. And I'm sure Wade's got his thoughts as well. But I just want you to know wherever you're going to head to, know that I think the elected leadership in this town is aligned with the values that you've shared today. So that needs to be said, and I'm really excited about that. So I sure appreciate you guys, and I wish you all well, and I hope we get to have more interactions. It's not, by the way, for folks who are leaving town as well, it's not unprecedented that when you come back on a break, whether it's after Thanksgiving or maybe, you know, the holidays or next summer or your sophomore or junior or senior year, you know what, reach out. These relationships don't end when you move out of Fort Collins. And so several of you talked about political science, and well, you've got people who are now PhDs in poli-sci because of running this big city. So I would just say on all of our behalfs, you know, please consider us a resource as well throughout your career. So that's all I had, Mayor.
Oh, this is a great session, a great topic, and thank you all for making it special, and thank council members as well as our guests and Jackie. And I know we have a lot of staff on as well, and I think the staff here is here to share in the learning with all of us. So thanks for all that have joined us with this. Jackie, is there any other business to take care of?
I think the only, I know last month when we talked about the future of health equity, which a lot, you know, I think every futures committee discussion seems to build upon the last. And so, and Councilmember Gorgel, thanks for mentioning an idea for another topic is around building community in the future, especially for people of color in Fort Collins, and some amazing ideas and suggestions coming up from these young leaders. Just because things are changing so fast, and the mayor and Darren and I had a chance to talk right before this, I always like to give an opportunity if there's other topics that committee members would really like to see come before the committee. Megan and I are working on getting those slotted and scheduled, but I heard the one already from Councilmember Gorgel, but if there's any others, you know, in light of how much has changed even since last month, happy to take those as we start scheduling out the year.
Yeah, this is Julie. Just looking at our list of unscheduled items, things that if they could maybe be bumped up, if my fellow futures people would be interested, are examples of community-led processes, I think would be pretty relevant for right now, as well as kind of this reimagining engagement. This touches on a lot of stuff we talked about today. And also, as we have completely switched the engagement platform in the last 2 months, I think it may be relevant to talk about that sooner rather than later as well. This isn't a, you know, if you can't find the right speakers, that's fine, but those are just two that jump at me from our list.
I agree with, yeah, community-led process and then engagement.
Very good. Thank you. Anything else for the good of the whole? Thank you all, and have a wonderful night. And again, thanks to our guests, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Today.
Thanks for having
Good night. Good, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.